The galaxy was a place of constant war. For decades, the Zyre Empire had dominated, expanding their control across the stars. Their warships were like storms, unstoppable and ruthless. The Allied forces, made up of countless species and civilizations, fought back with all their strength, but they were losing. Every day, another planet fell. Another fleet was destroyed. Another hope was dashed. Commander Lyra watched the newsfeed on her ship, the Veritas, as the latest reports came in. Another city destroyed on Rigel 7. Another fleet of the Allied forces torn apart by Zyre fire. She ran her fingers through her hair, exhausted from the endless battle. There was no end in sight. The Zyre Empire was too powerful, too relentless. Lyra could feel the weight of defeat pressing down on her, but she had to keep fighting. Her people needed her. Suddenly, her comms officer's voice crackled through the air. "Commander, you're going to want to see this." Lyra stood up quickly, her attention snapped back to the situation at hand. She hurried to the communications console, where the officer had a strange signal on display. It was weak, barely a flicker in the vast void of space. But it was a signal nonetheless. "Is this another Zyre transmission?" Lyra asked, already preparing for the worst. The comms officer shook his head. "No, Commander. This signal isn't from the Zyre. It's human." Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. The signal was ancient, centuries old. How could it be human? The human fleet had disappeared long ago, its ships lost in the forgotten corners of the galaxy. The last of humanity's warships had been sent into deep space, their mission to stop a threat even worse than the Zyre. But after that, there were no more messages, no more signs. Humanity's fleet was a myth, lost to time. Or so everyone thought. Lyra stared at the screen, her mind racing. How was this possible? What did it mean? The signal was faint, but it was definitely human. And the coordinates it contained, they led to a place no one had ever charted, a location hidden in the farthest reaches of known space. It was a mystery, an enigma, one that could either save or doom the galaxy. "We need to investigate this," Lyra said, her voice steady, but her heart was beating faster. This could be the break the Allied forces needed, or it could be a trap. But one thing was certain, they had to find out. The decision was made in an instant. Lyra ordered her crew to prepare the Veritas for a long journey into the unknown. It would take weeks to reach the coordinates, but every second felt like a lifetime. Could this signal be the key to ending the war? Could this forgotten fleet hold the power to turn the tide in humanity's favor? The crew worked tirelessly, checking systems, calibrating engines, and preparing supplies. Lyra was busy reviewing old data on humanity's fleet, trying to learn everything she could about the ships that had once been humanity's last line of defense. They were older now, those ships, relics of a bygone era, but if they were still intact, they could be humanity's salvation. She couldn't help but wonder if the fleet was even still out there, waiting to be awakened. As the days passed, Lyra found herself staring out at the endless void of space, wondering about the origins of the signal. What had happened to the human fleet? Had they been lost in battle? Or had they gone into hiding, waiting for the right moment to strike? The crew was nervous too. They knew the importance of this mission. It could mean everything for the future of the galaxy. They had seen countless friends and allies fall to the Zyre, and they weren't ready to give up yet. But doubts lingered in their minds. What if this signal was a trap? What if it was a remnant of the Zyre, trying to lead them into an ambush? Days turned into weeks, and soon they were approaching the coordinates. The tension on the ship was palpable. Lyra gathered her crew for a final briefing. "We don't know what we'll find out there," she said, her voice steady but serious. "It could be a fleet of human ships, or it could be a mistake. But whatever happens, we need to be ready. Stay focused, and we will face whatever comes together." The crew nodded, determination in their eyes. They had been fighting for so long, and now, this signal had given them something they hadn't had in a long time: hope. As they neared the location, Lyra's heart raced. They were entering uncharted space, a place where no one had gone for centuries. The stars seemed to grow dimmer, as if even the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, just as they were about to cross into the unknown, the comms officer's voice broke the silence. "Commander, we've detected something ahead. It's big." Lyra's pulse quickened. Could it be? Was it the fleet? They couldn't be sure, but there was no turning back now. "Prepare to enter the coordinates," Lyra ordered. "We need to see this for ourselves." The Veritas plunged forward into the heart of the unknown. The crew braced themselves, unsure of what awaited them. But one thing was certain: the forgotten signal had led them to something monumental. Whether it was a treasure or a disaster, they were about to find out. The galaxy's fate hung in the balance, and the crew of the Veritas was about to uncover a secret that had been hidden for centuries. What they found next would change everything. The Veritas cruised silently through the empty void, cutting through the endless darkness like a knife. The crew was on edge, eyes fixed on the monitors and the vast expanse of space outside. Every second felt heavier than the last as the mysterious signal grew stronger, guiding them closer to their destination. Commander Lyra stood at the helm, her gaze locked on the screens ahead. She had seen many things during the war, but nothing like this. The feeling in the pit of her stomach wasn't just nerves, it was something else. Something ancient, something forgotten. "Coordinates in sight, Commander," the navigation officer reported. Her voice was steady, but even she couldn't hide the anxiety creeping into her tone. Lyra nodded, her mind racing. They were almost there. The galaxy had been at war for so long that the thought of finding something peaceful, something untouched by the chaos, was almost too much to hope for. But this signal, it wasn't just a faint whisper. It was a call, a beacon, one that had endured the ages to reach them now. "Prepare to enter the coordinates," Lyra ordered. "All crew, remain alert. We don't know what we're walking into." There was a brief moment of silence before the ship lurched forward, moving deeper into uncharted space. The crew exchanged looks, wondering what awaited them. Lyra couldn't blame them. Even she felt the weight of uncertainty pressing on her chest. The screens ahead flickered, and then suddenly, a shape appeared. At first, it was barely noticeable, a faint outline in the distance. But as they drew closer, the shape grew clearer. It was a massive structure, something beyond anything they had ever seen. Towering, ancient, and silent. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. What is that?" The structure wasn't just a building or a station, it was a fleet. A fleet of warships, frozen in time. Hundreds of massive vessels, each one a masterpiece of technology, silent and still, as if they had been waiting for centuries. The sight was breathtaking and chilling at the same time. The ships looked almost like they belonged to a different age, their designs intricate and mysterious, their surfaces covered in layers of dust and debris. "We've found them," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. She could hardly believe it. Humanity's forgotten fleet, the one that had disappeared so long ago, was right in front of them. But why had it been left here, abandoned in the dark corners of space? The comms officer worked quickly, trying to make contact. But there was no response. The fleet was silent, its engines cold and dormant. It was as if the ships had been waiting for something or someone. Lyra felt a pang of unease. These ships were powerful, yes. They were humanity's last line of defense, capable of devastating entire fleets. But what good were they if they were just sitting here, lost and forgotten? "Bring us in closer," Lyra ordered. "We need to see if we can wake them up." The Veritas moved closer to the first ship, a massive vessel with sleek, angular edges. It was larger than anything Lyra had ever seen before. The structure looked like a war machine, built for destruction. She could almost feel the power emanating from it, even in its dormant state. "Commander, we've got a problem," the navigation officer called out. "We're receiving strange energy readings. Something's not right. Lyra frowned, her instincts telling her to be cautious. What kind of energy? It's like a low-level pulse, coming from the ships themselves, the officer replied, her voice tense. It's almost like they're alive. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. Could these ships be more than just vessels? Had they been designed with something more, something beyond just the power to fight? Her mind raced with questions, but there was no time to dwell on them. They had to make a decision, whether to board one of the ships and try to activate it, or leave and report back. We can't turn back now, Lyra said firmly. We've come too far. Prepare a team. We're boarding one of the ships. The crew scrambled to get everything ready. As they prepared to board, Lyra's mind wandered to the possibilities. Could this fleet be the key to ending the war? Could it be humanity's answer to the Zyre Empire's relentless assault? But as the Veritas docked with one of the ships, Lyra's doubts crept back in. The silence around them was oppressive. The ships were lifeless, yet they held so much potential. She could only hope that they would find what they needed, hope that this wasn't all just a trap, an ancient relic that would do more harm than good. The boarding team, a group of elite soldiers, suited up and readied themselves for the unknown. The air was thick with anticipation, but Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She couldn't put her finger on it, but the entire fleet felt wrong. There was something waiting, something that had been hidden for far too long. Let's move out, Lyra commanded. The team entered the massive ship through a docking airlock, their weapons drawn and their senses on high alert. The interior was just as ancient as the exterior, dust-covered consoles, cracked screens, and forgotten technology. But the most striking feature was the silence. It was as if the ship had been asleep for centuries, waiting for someone to wake it up. Lyra and her team moved deeper into the ship, searching for any signs of life. And then, as they rounded a corner, they saw it, a control room, alive with lights and blinking panels. It was a stark contrast to the rest of the ship, which had been frozen in time. A low hum filled the room as the systems powered up. The forgotten fleet was stirring, and it was only a matter of time before they learned if the galaxy was ready for what was about to come. The lights inside the control room flickered to life, casting a harsh glow across the dusty surfaces. The sound of machinery whirring filled the air, and the entire ship seemed to come alive, its dormant systems slowly starting to hum with power. It was as if the ship had been waiting for this moment, for someone to awaken it. But there was something else, something deeper, lurking within the core of the vessel. Lyra and her team stepped cautiously into the room, weapons at the ready. They moved with practiced precision, their every footstep echoing through the cavernous space. The walls were lined with alien technology, devices far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. Consoles blinked with strange symbols, and displays flickered in and out of focus. It was as though the ship had been frozen in time, waiting for the right moment to be awakened. But now, that moment had come. "Commander," said Lieutenant Asher, a member of Lyra's team. "Look at this." He gestured to a large console at the center of the room. It was glowing brightly, and a faint, pulsing light seemed to emanate from within. The symbol on the screen was simple, human in design, but old, very old. Lyra moved closer, her heart racing, as she recognized the symbol. It was a sigil that had been used by the last generation of humanity's war fleets before they had disappeared, their existence lost to time. But this ship, this fleet, wasn't supposed to be here. The signal had led them here, but why? "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think." Asher hesitated, his fingers hovering over the console. "I think it's asking for activation. Like, it's waiting for a command." Lyra frowned. Could it really be that simple? This was humanity's forgotten fleet, a fleet that had been left behind by a war long lost. But now, with just the press of a button, it seemed like they could wake it up, bring it back to life. "Activate it," Lyra ordered. Asher's fingers moved swiftly across the console, pressing several buttons in rapid succession. The room buzzed with energy as the system powered up. A deep hum reverberated through the ship, and the lights in the control room brightened. Outside the windows, the other ships of the fleet began to stir as well. One by one, they activated, their engines roaring to life, sending ripples of power throughout the ship. "Commander," said Sergeant Morrow, who had been watching the view from the window. "Look." Lyra turned to see what he was pointing at. The other ships in the fleet were rising from their slumber. Their engines hummed with newfound energy, and their massive hulls slowly began to shift in space. They were waking up, all at once. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice filled with awe. "We've just activated humanity's most powerful fleet." But as she said the words, a deep rumble shook the ship, and the lights flickered once more. The screens on the walls began to flash wildly, displaying strange symbols and warnings that Lyra couldn't understand. The room grew colder, and the humming sound became louder, almost deafening. "Something's wrong," Asher said, his voice laced with concern. The crew moved quickly to assess the situation. Lyra glanced at the screen in front of her. The energy readings were off the charts, and the system seemed to be overloading. It wasn't just the ships that were waking up. Something else had been activated, something far more dangerous. "Commander," said Sergeant Morrow, "the fleet. It's not just powering up. It's reacting to something." Lyra's heart raced. She knew that humanity's fleet had been designed for war. But this felt different. Something wasn't right. These ships had been dormant for so long, yet they were reacting to something they couldn't see. Could the fleet itself have become sentient over time? Was there a deeper connection between the ships and the signal they had followed here? Before she could respond, the ship shook violently, sending everyone stumbling. The walls seemed to groan under the pressure, and the lights flickered again, casting shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. "Hold steady," Lyra shouted, trying to keep the crew together. "Something's not right, but we have to stay calm." As the rumbling subsided, Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. The ship had stopped shaking, but the humming sound remained, now much louder. It felt as if the fleet was alive, watching them, waiting for them to make the next move. "What do we do now?" Asher asked, his voice tense. Lyra's mind raced. They had awakened something far greater than they had anticipated. The fleet was alive, and it was reacting to them. But why? What had been lying dormant for so long? And more importantly, what had caused it to wake now? "I don't know," Lyra admitted. "But we're not leaving without answers. Everyone, stay alert." The crew continued to monitor the situation, but Lyra knew that whatever they had unleashed, it wasn't just a fleet of ships. It was something far more dangerous, something humanity hadn't even begun to understand. But there was one thing that was clear. The war had just taken a turn, and the fleet that had been dormant for centuries was now awake, and it was ready for whatever came next. As the crew of the ancient ship continued to monitor the fleet's awakening, the unsettling feeling in the air grew. The hum of the systems had now turned into a constant vibration, sending tremors through the floor and walls. Lyra stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the main screen, which displayed images of the fleet's ships slowly maneuvering into position. They were silent, their massive hulls now fully operational, yet there was something disconcertingly empty about them. They moved like ghosts, too calm, too perfect. "We're not in control of them," Asher murmured from behind Lyra, his voice strained with disbelief. "They're doing it on their own." Lyra didn't need to look at him to know what he meant. These ships, once meant to serve humanity's greatest military effort, were now responding to a force she couldn't comprehend. The control systems had been overridden, or had they been waiting for the right moment to make their own decisions? "We need answers," Lyra said, trying to push back the rising panic in her chest. "Something's controlling them. But what?" Before anyone could respond, the room suddenly plunged into darkness. The lights above flickered and went out completely, leaving only the eerie glow of the ship's emergency systems. A low, rhythmic thrum filled the air, reverberating through the walls. The crew remained silent, their faces cast in deep shadows. A voice, distant but clear, echoed through the control room. It was neither human nor machine. It was something far older. Awakened at last. The words sent a chill down Lyra's spine. It was not the voice of a person, but of something ancient, something that had been waiting. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It resonated in the very core of their minds. What was that? Asher asked, his voice shaky. I don't know, Lyra said, her heart racing. But we need to figure out what's going on. Now. Before anyone could take another step, the emergency lights flickered back on, casting the room into a harsh red glow. On the main screen, the image of the fleet had changed. The ships that had been drifting in silence were now arranged in a tight formation, their engines glowing a sinister red. They weren't just waiting. They were preparing. Look, Morrow shouted, pointing at the screen. The formation of ships had shifted, and now they were moving toward the center of the galaxy. There was no hesitation, no warning. Something's driving them. It's like they have a mission. Lyra muttered, her eyes glued to the screen. But what could it be? The fleet had been dormant for centuries, forgotten by time. What could have triggered such a sudden shift in their behavior? Lyra had a sinking feeling in her stomach. This was no ordinary fleet. The ships were not merely machines. They had a purpose that they were now ready to fulfill. The sound of footsteps behind her broke Lyra from her thoughts. Lieutenant Hawk entered the room, his face pale, his eyes wide with concern. Commander, we've detected something, Hawk said, his voice tight with urgency. We've picked up an energy signal coming from the center of the galaxy. Where exactly? Lyra asked, already fearing the answer. It's coming from a planet, Hawk replied. A dead planet, deep within the galactic core. Lyra felt her blood run cold. A dead planet. In the heart of the galaxy. Is it possible there's still life there? She asked, her mind racing. Hawk shook his head. No life signs detected. It's not a living planet. Whatever it is, it's been dead for a long time. The crew fell silent. The answer only raised more questions. Why would a fleet of this magnitude be heading toward a dead planet in the galactic core? And why now? Before Lyra could ask further, the voice from earlier echoed through the room again, this time louder, more commanding. Prepare. The final stage is upon you. The air seemed to thicken with tension as Lyra's mind raced. The fleet was no longer merely responding to the signal. It was following a plan, a purpose far greater than anyone could understand. The fact that it was headed toward a dead planet in the center of the galaxy was no coincidence. Something was waiting there. Something old. Something powerful. Commander, what do we do? Asher asked, his voice steady but filled with fear. Lyra's eyes were glued to the screen, her mind trying to process everything at once. They had woken up the fleet, but now it seemed like they were part of something much bigger. The fleet wasn't just answering a call, it was fulfilling an order. But who or what had given that order? We follow them, Lyra said, her voice resolute. We have to know what's going on. We can't let them go there alone. The crew nodded, a mixture of fear and determination in their eyes. They were about to embark on a journey into the unknown, but there was no turning back now. As the fleet slowly moved toward the center of the galaxy, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of something catastrophic, something that had been waiting for a long time. And now, it was awake. The ship's engines hummed as they followed the ancient fleet, now fully aware of the path they were on. The crew stood at their stations, eyes glued to the monitors as they watched the fleet's movements in eerie silence. Each of them could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Lyra stood at the helm, her hands gripping the console. Her mind raced, running through countless theories, but none made sense. Why were they headed to the dead planet in the galactic core? And what was waiting for them there? "We're almost there," Morrow said, breaking the silence. "The fleet is slowing down." Lyra's gaze shifted to the screen, where the red glow of the fleet's engines grew dimmer. The massive ships were slowing their approach, their formation shifting as if responding to some unseen force. It was clear now. The fleet wasn't just following orders. It was being guided. But by who? And for what purpose? "Prepare for entry into the galactic core," Lyra ordered, her voice steady despite the swirling storm in her chest. "All stations, be on alert." The galactic core was a place of mystery. Few had ventured this far into the galaxy, and even fewer had returned to tell the tale. It was a region of dense stars and black holes, filled with radiation and gravitational anomalies. Yet, the fleet moved as though it had no fear, as though it had been through this place countless times before. The crew did their best to stay focused, but the ominous feeling in the air was growing. The dark energy that surrounded them seemed to seep into their very souls. Lyra's thoughts kept drifting back to the voice they had heard earlier. It felt as though it was speaking to them, guiding them, or perhaps warning them. "We've entered the core," Hawk said, his voice barely audible. His eyes were wide as he looked at the readings. "Something's here. I don't know what it is, but it's massive." Lyra stepped forward, her breath caught in her throat. On the screen, the dead planet they had been heading toward loomed ahead. It was larger than anything they had seen before, a dark sphere that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. There was no atmosphere, no life, no signs of movement. It was as if the planet had been abandoned for eons. And yet, the fleet was here, surrounding it, their ships now in a perfect formation. They were waiting for something. Waiting for a signal, perhaps. "Are we sure this is safe?" Asher asked, his voice tense. "This doesn't feel right. We're walking straight into the unknown." Lyra could hear the fear in his voice, and she understood it. The galaxy had been at war for so long. Peace had felt like an illusion. Now it seemed like they were standing at the edge of a precipice, staring into a void that threatened to swallow everything they knew. "We don't have a choice," Lyra replied, her tone firm. "We need to find out what's happening. We can't let the fleet move on without knowing why they're here." Just as she spoke, the voice echoed through the ship again, louder this time, filling every corner of their minds. "Welcome to the threshold." The voice was like an ancient whisper, a sound from deep within the galaxy, a voice that seemed to come from the planet itself. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. The fleet's ships began to move, their engines lighting up as they prepared to descend toward the planet. They were no longer waiting. They were ready. "What is that?" Morrow asked, his voice barely a whisper. The surface of the planet seemed to stir, as though something beneath it was awakening. Deep cracks appeared in the planet's surface, glowing with a fiery orange light. The crew watched in awe and fear as massive structures began to rise from the planet's core. It was a sight that no one could have predicted. A massive, ancient structure, almost like a fortress, emerging from the planet's crust. It's alive," Hawk breathed. "Somehow, it's alive." Lyra's stomach twisted as she watched the structures rise. There was no mistaking it now. Whatever had been dormant for centuries was waking up, and the fleet was leading them straight into its grasp. "What is this place?" Lyra asked, more to herself than anyone else. Before anyone could respond, the planet's surface cracked open further, and from within the depths, a massive beam of light shot up into space, surrounding the fleet. The light was unlike anything they had ever seen. Bright, pure, and almost hypnotic. It filled the cockpit, making everything around them glow with an otherworldly brilliance. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the beam of light faded, and the planet returned to its quiet, dead state. The fleet's ships remained in position, as if they had completed a task, one that no one understood. "We need to leave," Lyra said, her voice urgent. "This isn't over." But as she spoke, the fleet's ships began to move once more, this time toward the planet. They were not leaving. They were descending. And Lyra knew, with a sinking feeling in her gut, that the war had just begun anew. Lyra's heart raced as the fleet descended toward the planet. The deep hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the floor, echoing in the pit of her stomach. The massive, ancient ships of humanity's fleet, once dormant for so long, now hummed with life and purpose. They moved like giants through space, each one as unstoppable as the next, their sheer size and power making Lyra feel both awe and terror. The dark planet below seemed to pulse, as if it were alive, responding to the fleet's arrival. Lyra watched the eerie glow from the surface, where enormous structures continued to rise. These weren't just ruins. This was something far more ancient, far more powerful. "What's happening?" Asher's voice trembled from behind Lyra. His hands gripped his console, as if he could steady himself by sheer will. "They're waking up," Lyra muttered, more to herself than anyone else. She glanced at the rest of the crew, all of them locked in stunned silence, staring at the scene unfolding on the view screen. The structures continued to emerge, their outlines jagged and towering. Something inside them stirred, something old, something dangerous. The voice returned, louder this time, resonating in their minds, filling the bridge of the ship. It was unmistakable, an ancient, commanding tone that seemed to pierce the very fabric of space itself. "Awakening, the time has come." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The words felt like an order. No one on board had issued a command. Yet the fleet, humanity's fleet, moved as one. The ships of every class, from the massive battle cruisers to the smaller, nimble frigates, glided in perfect harmony toward the planet. The fleet was united, as though it had always known its destination. "We're not in control anymore," Morrow said, his voice filled with dread. "Stay calm," Lyra replied. "We need to find out what this is. Why are we here?" The fleet's ships closed the distance, entering the atmosphere of the dead planet. The air around them crackled with energy, as if the very planet was alive, breathing in time with the fleet. The strange structures now revealed themselves as towering obelisks, each one covered in strange, glowing symbols. They weren't just buildings, they were part of something greater, something ancient. Suddenly, the entire fleet shuddered, a deep vibration rippling through the ships. Lyra felt it, like a pulse that ran through her very bones. The fleet came to a halt, suspended in space just above the planet's surface. The voice spoke again, clearer now. "The path has been chosen. You are the chosen." Lyra looked at the crew, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. Asher was gripping his seat, sweat dripping from his brow. Morrow was hunched over the control panel, typing furiously, but no commands seemed to register. The fleet had its own will, it seemed, and they were merely passengers now, swept along by its unstoppable momentum. "What does it mean, the chosen?" Lyra whispered. She turned to Hawk. He had been silent for most of the journey, but now he met her gaze, his eyes wide with realization. "The fleet was waiting for something, or someone," he said softly. "I think we've been chosen to wake it up." Before Lyra could respond, the massive obelisks on the planet below began to glow brighter, their symbols shifting and moving. The sky overhead lit up with an intense, blinding light as the ground beneath them rumbled. Lyra could feel the immense power building, a force unlike anything she had ever encountered. "What is that?" Asher asked, his voice shaking. "It's happening," Lyra said, her voice a whisper. "The fleet, it's connected to this planet. It's part of the same system. It's been waiting here, dormant, until now." The ship's systems flickered as the immense energy of the planet's awakening reached its peak. The fleet shuddered again, and Lyra's control panel went blank for a moment. She could feel the weight of the planet's energy pressing down on them, like an invisible hand squeezing the life out of their ship. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The light dimmed, and the rumbling ceased. The ships of the fleet hung in the air, as though waiting for the next command. their silence deafening. The voice spoke once more, but this time it was not the same calm tone. It was filled with power, reverberating through the ship like thunder. "Now, we begin." Lyra's mind raced. She understood now. The fleet was not simply a weapon. It was a key to unlocking something far greater, something that had been hidden for millennia. The war was over, but a new challenge was beginning. The galaxy had no idea what it was about to face. "Get ready," Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of dread. This is just the beginning. As the fleet began to move once more, Lyra realized that they weren't just witnessing history, they were becoming part of it. And whatever came next, there would be no turning back. The fleet surged forward as one, their movements synchronized with the precision of an ancient clockwork mechanism. Each ship hummed with energy, and Lyra could feel it vibrating beneath her feet. The entire fleet was in motion, its course set toward the heart of the galaxy. Lyra sat in the command seat, her hands resting lightly on the control panel. The air was thick with anticipation. Her crew was silent, each of them locked in their own thoughts as the weight of the situation settled in. They were no longer simply observers. They were part of something much larger. "What's our destination?" Asher's voice broke the stillness. His eyes were fixed on the view screen, watching the stars blur into lines as the fleet accelerated into warp speed. Lyra paused before answering, her gaze never leaving the monitor. "I don't know, but I have a feeling we're going to find out soon enough." The voice from the fleet spoke again, more insistent this time. "You are the chosen. The path is set. You will lead." It was both a command and a prophecy. Lyra's heart beat faster as the weight of those words sank in. They had been chosen. The fleet had chosen them. But for what purpose? What was the true nature of this awakening? The ship passed through the final barrier of the galaxy's outer rim. Stars seemed to stretch and twist as the warp tunnel collapsed behind them, revealing an entirely new region of space. It was darker here, the stars fewer and farther apart. But there was something else, a presence, something ancient, lurking just beyond the edge of perception. Lyra's thoughts raced. The voice had said they would lead, but lead to what? And who or what was guiding them? The more she thought about it, the more she realized they weren't heading toward a specific target. They were being drawn to something, like moths to a flame. "Look at that," Morrow said suddenly, his voice full of awe. Lyra turned to the view screen. In the distance, a massive structure loomed in the emptiness of space. It was like nothing they had ever seen. Its surface was smooth and metallic, reflecting the dim light of distant stars. But it was massive, unimaginably so. Its size dwarfed even the largest of the ships in the fleet. "This is what we were waiting for," Lyra whispered. The fleet slowed as they approached the structure, its vastness unfolding like a nightmare. The closer they got, the more details they could make out. Pulsing lights, shifting shadows, and strange markings that seemed to change when looked at from different angles. It was a space station, yes, but it was more than that. This was no ordinary facility. It was something older than any civilization in the galaxy, something that predated even humanity's oldest records. As they drew near, the voice spoke again, filling their minds with an overwhelming surge of energy. "Enter, awaken, become one with the eternal." Lyra's eyes widened in realization. The fleet wasn't just connected to this structure, it was part of it. The ships were an extension of whatever intelligence lay hidden within the ancient station. And now, humanity had become the final piece in a puzzle that had been waiting for millennia.